to the EQ video tip. I'm your host, Eric Forsair, and as always, we're so grateful that you're here to watch our show. Before we get into this week's EQ video tip, let's take a quick review of the goals of EQ video tip. Welcome back. We've got a great show today, and it comes to us from Steve Magnus, who wrote a book about myths about resilience that you need to stop believing so that you can cultivate true grit. And we all know that grit is a key essential component of emotional intelligence. What we're going to do this week is jump in and talk about these 5 myths that Steve thinks are out there and ways that you can cultivate stronger grit and increase your EQ. Tip number 1, and I love this one. Acting tough isn't the same as being tough. And we've all had this where people have this fundamental misunderstanding of what actually it means to be tough. A lot of times people think they're tough because they can bully someone, or they can abuse them, or have hostility, or be that tough coach, or be hard on their employees. But that's not actually being tough. That might be demanding, and sometimes demanding parents feel the same way. They feel like they have to be overexertive all on their kids and push, quote, toughness on them. The same thing with employees. They think, or employers, I should say, they think if they're more in line with a tough attitude and a hard-nosed attitude on their employees, then that's going to work out well. But in fact, it's the opposite, because it actually shows that people who do this and put all that pressure end up with less disciplined employees, less disciplined sports figures, less persistent individuals. And in the end, what we really need to understand is that toughness isn't based on something we've propped up over the years, but it's actually our inner strength. It comes from, real toughness comes from that quiet, deep within you. It's the ability to make that right choice under stress, under adversity, uncertainty, fatigue, things like that. This requires emotional control. If you're able to have that emotional control, then you have real self-awareness, self-toughness, and that's where that sense of self-security is born, and it's rooted in that confidence but not arrogance. And it's important to know that toughness is about figuring out how to thrive in adversity, and it isn't concerned about prospering. Tip number 2, understand your inner world and don't avoid it. And a lot of us grew up with a world where emotions and feelings were your enemy, and you weren't supposed to actually have them. You weren't supposed to have feelings. Instead, you're supposed to shun them or push them out or drive them away. That's actually the opposite of what you want to do. In fact, this is not the message that should come either in the parenting world or in the working world, because emotions are appropriate everywhere in our world. So what we need to do is understand that feelings and emotions are messengers from our bodies, and it's what we relay to ourselves as what's going on. And we don't want to shun them. Instead, we want to decipher them and use language to describe them. And when we do that, we're going to build up our grit and understand a better resilience about ourselves. Tip number 3, bravado backfires. And what we mean by that is you have to have self-confidence, but you can't be too overly self-confident, because we know that guy who walks in the room, or that girl, overly self-confident, thinking they're going to succeed at this project only to see it crumble before their eyes. In fact, it's more important to have something called humble confidence, where you're confident you can control the situation and succeed, but there is a little doubt in you when it comes to what you're dealing with, and you know that, and you're acknowledging that there's a weakness inside of you and that you're capable of doing stuff, but this may scare you, and at some point you may fail. Because thinking that through and having that humble confidence, we understand that at the end of the day, this will carry us through, that even though it's a difficult task, we possess the skill set to make it succeed. Our next tip, respond, don't react. And it sounds like it's the same thing, but it's really different. We're trying to limit what our amygdala does. There's so many times when we say in our life, I'm just going to react. I've got the answer, I'm going to go. But instead, we have to be able to pause and take a minute to do that. And it's important to think about, how do we do those pauses? For example, maybe every time your cell phone buzzes for a new text message or for a Slack message or something, an Instagram reminder, you take a moment and don't respond to it. Teach yourself to be able to have self-control, because when you do that, it's going to give you the ability to take time before you respond to situations. When you feel the urge to react, pause for a second, take a deep breath, sit with that urge, try to work through that. It's going to develop that mental muscle that everyone needs to be controlled, to be considerate, and to be deliberate with others. I know the other day I went through a stressful situation with my phone and was ready to yell at the phone rep from Verizon, but instead I took a moment, I paused and realized it wasn't their fault. They were trying to help me out. In doing that, we prevent ourselves from dealing with a world that pushes us towards reactions. We slow down what we do in terms of response time, and by doing so, we give the skills that we desperately need in society a chance to thrive. Our last tip. Real toughness comes from satisfying your core needs. And what do we mean by that? You need to have a team and a manager, of course, that's supportive, that doesn't thwart your abilities, lets you have input, a voice, the ability for you to progress and grow in your career. You also want to feel connected to your team. It's important that you have a sense that the mission that you're working on has meaningfulness and is in the pursuit of what you want to do. And according to research by several major psychologists in this field, they researched NBA basketball players as well as workers in a workplace. And what they found was that the determination of someone's success is very much correlated to their manager. Managers who were overbearing, micromanaging, not supportive, tended to have employees who didn't follow that path of success and didn't have that grit that they needed. While as the managers who were more supportive and more helpful to their employees and coached them in a way that was loving and meaningful and empathetic to what they're doing, had better team dynamics, more success, had projects that found new ideas. So you have to figure out your toughness and feel that your work, while demanding, is respected, is valued by your manager. And as a manager, we have to make sure we do that for our employees as well, because as you give an employee more autonomy and less micromanaging, the job level of satisfaction increases, and so does their performance. And toughness is amplified because we feel like we have a choice and can make a difference. And part of being tough is feeling like you have the ability and the grit every day to go out, make that decision, and grow your team. So make sure that real toughness comes from satisfying your core needs. That concludes this week's EQ video tip. It's a great article, and we only covered several facets of it. Here's a quick recap of what we went through, but I'd encourage all of you to read this week's article. So that concludes our EQ video tip for today. Try incorporating some of these tips into your daily routine. But remember, use what works best for you and personalize it for yourself. Thank you always to our great research team for providing us with some great tips today. As always on EQ Video Tip, we want to end with gratitude. So thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. Here are some resources that you can use if you want more information on EQ going forward. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.